The post-game show is next.
Welcome into Pro Football Today. It's time for the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. There we go. Tom Vecchio coming in to give us some angles and perspective on what we saw in that second half. Now, if you joined us for the halftime show here on Pro Football Today, then you heard Tom mention that he had hope that there was going to be more spark coming in hot for the Jets in the second half, and that's exactly what we saw. They didn't allow some of those plays to completely deflate them. As a matter of fact, challenging some of those plays, getting the calls finally on their side, and then being able to pick up some offensive plays, help them get in position to pull off a big victory, 21-13, topping the Texans. So Jets finally get in the W column. You saw a lot of emotion on the sidelines. Most importantly, as you called it, Tom, what did you see in that second half?
Yeah, when it comes down to, for the Texans, like their defense and just like the health of their players, like they were just facing attrition at a certain point. Like they just dealing with injuries, backups were getting in there. And, ultimately the Jets like moved the ball pretty well. Again, that first half, the player Malachi Conley dropped the ball at the goal line. Like they could have a touchdown. So they were kind of moving a little bit on offense, and then it just wasn't there. And, because of the injuries, Rodgers eventually is going to start picking apart defense. And no matter how slow they start, we've seen the Jets kind of come alive at second half sometimes. And listen, Rodgers, 22, 32, 211, and 3 touchdowns. Like that's not the most amazing stat line, but 3 touchdowns and 22 completions is pretty good. A solid game from Breece Hall on the ground. Amazing stuff from Garrett Wilson. First of all, that catch is just absolutely awesome. Like that's what we want to see. 9 for 90 and 2 for him. And then of course, Davante Adams with that late touchdown, which I am certainly very thankful for. But you would like to say this is like an encouraging sign for the Jets. And as long as they can bring what they did in the third and fourth quarter, like that opening third quarter drive when they got the ball at halftime was like picture perfect. They moved the ball, they mixed the run, they mixed the pass. Like bring that for the entire game. And if their defense can, kind of hold things down and continue to get pressure, like they can start to put together some wins. Now, granted, the Texans don't have Diggs, don't have Collins. We all spoke about this. Everyone's been talking about this. So the Texans weren't operating at full health. We know that they also have a horrible offensive line. But if the Jets defense can do parts of what they did and the Jets offense can have that a little more consistency of fourth quarters, they can string together some wins. I'm not going to say they're going to win the division, but they still have a shot at making the playoffs.
Yeah, well, you make a good point to basically pointing out some of the efficiency or the efficient drives that they started to capitalize off of and bring into their play to get downfield, because still heading into halftime, they only had like 9 minutes and 30 seconds of offensive play time. The Texans were very much controlling the ball at that point, but you also mentioned the potential fatigue for the Texans defense. Not that was the case. I think it was more Jets finding a rhythm, Jets becoming more efficient versus the Texans defense kind of blowing plays out there. But to capitalize on the night, 26 minutes and 18 seconds for the Jets in playtime versus 33 minutes and 42 seconds where the Texans had the ball. So it was a lot of better management in that second half. Efficiency, as you pointed out, perfection in the third drives, as you also mentioned. Not something else to take a look at. They were sitting at 17% when it came to the third down percentage. They upped that to 42%, topping the Texans, who were sitting at 35% when it came down to their third down efficiency. So just a number of tweak management that they were able to execute on to help them be able to pull off this 21-13 victory. Now, we got to give you your moment. I talked my talk in pregame. I thought my SGP was going to wipe the floor with yours. That wasn't the case, but you did have a big win. And now's your moment. Davante Adams with the touchdown, and you lined it up perfectly. You still had hope with the concussion protocol, and he came in hot, closing out the game there. So the victory is yours, Tom, with your plays of the night.
Yeah, Davante Adams comes through, big. Schultz didn't get there. I thought he was just going to play a bigger role. Now, granted, C.J. Stroud didn't do a whole lot, only 191. And listen, Tank Dell had a huge game, 126 yards. If, I happened to be on Tank Dell, that would have certainly been good. But, Robert Woods with 44 yards was a bit surprising to me. I expected John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson to play a bigger role, which we didn't see a catch out of anyone else. It was Tank Dell with 6, Robert Woods with 2, Dalton Schultz with 3. No one else caught a pass. So this could be a bit of an indication of where their offense moves. Now, granted, they are going to be getting Nico Collins back, so it's not like he's done for the year like Diggs is. But In the short term, like it's going to be a lot of Joe Mixon. That's what it comes down to. It's just going to be Joe Mixon show 24 and 106 and 1 on the ground. Like this is exactly what we spoke about on the pregame show with Dave, where I said Joe Mixon had gone over 20 carries, which is what his prop was sitting at 20 and a half, in 4 of the 5 games that he's played. The 2 times he went under was one when he got hurt against Chicago in week 2 on Sunday night. And then when they played at New England, that was the first game back for Joe Mixon. Also, the Texans were out so far ahead. Like, why are you going to give your running back all these carries in his first game back? So every other game, Joe Mixon is seeing the ball 20 plus times. And those are even games when they had Steph Diggs and Nico Collins. So that is a very, very clear spot to attack for the Texans, probably for the rest of the year.
100%. Him finding 100 yards on the ground is not a tall task for Mixon whatsoever. But again, when he was in the stripes, we saw how efficient he was in where the accountability lied on Mixon's shoulders. That's why it was a huge loss for them in the mix of that. But outside of it, you mentioned Dell having that big performance. I was surprised to see Woods come in second behind Dell there because we all thought Schultz was going to get more involved. If you guys were watching in-game live with Kevin, Donnie, and Joe, you probably heard a lot of emotion behind Donnie because he was oh so close. If only they just gave a little bit more play to Schultz. That's where I thought it was going to go. That's where I was hoping it was going to go. Hutchinson, the opportunities were there. We saw one of the red zone plays trying to be executed actually in the end zone, pardon me. And then there was just this disconnect when it came to him trying to shake off the defender and get back and play for the route and where C.J. Stroud placed the ball. So some of this is just starting to learn a rhythm with these other guys, with these secondary guys. And that could take a couple more games, but you would expect that things pick up with Michi and Hutchinson. But outside of that, they've probably got to try to find a way to get Schultz more involved because when you're going against certain teams, and there's a handful of teams in the league right now that give up a certain amount of plays to the tight ends. I'm not just biasly saying that because of my love for the tight ends. It's just the way that the cookie crumbles. So we'll see how things shake out for the Texans as they try to get back in the W column for them. And then as you mentioned, when it comes to the Jets, just kind of finding that rhythm. This was a big game for Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, not just because the Jets needed the win. They needed to see that they can find that chemistry, that they can rely on one another, and that they can execute. And finding that rhythm, 7 receptions for Adams, 91 receiving yards, and that crucial touchdown just tells you that there might be some things back in play for the Jets. So stick with Tom and myself here on Pro Football Today. It's the post-game show now here on SportsGrid TV. Make sure you're following SportsGrid over on X. That is at SportsGrid. Also, give Tom a congratulations for the big play of the day because a couple of people didn't have Adams finding the end zone. But regardless, a good matchup at the end of it all here for Thursday Night Football. Stick with us on the other side of this break here on SportsGrid.
Has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump, his release. It's really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from 3. Now, I'm not saying he's shooting 49% from 3 for the season. But if he's at 42, 43%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the game start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into Pro Football Today, the post-game show now with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV, running through the Thursday night matchup of the Texans taking on the Jets, but falling short 13-21, a victory for the Jets. Finally, everybody, so we talked about what we saw in that second half. If you joined Tom and I for the Pro Football Today halftime show, you kind of saw the indication of where the first half was going, what we expected for that second half. A lot of good calls during that halftime show. More importantly, some big wins all around. So taking this team by team, starting with the offense for the Jets, we talked about a number of targets that the Jets had options to pass the ball around to. While it was a slow start, it was not particularly a slow close for this team. Adams racking up the yardage that he needed, finding the success that he needed, getting that romance with Rodgers that we've talked about. 7 receptions, 91 passing yards, finds that touchdown. Garrett Wilson with a big game. Honestly, if not for him and many of the plays that he executed tonight, they probably wouldn't have found some of the success offensively. So he finishes out the night, 90 receiving yards through 9 receptions, 2 touchdowns belonging to him. And then it goes on and on from there. So we talked about where these guys' numbers stood originally. We talked about the wide receiving room when we take things head-to-head in the pregame show. But what did you see out of this Jets offense in terms of hitting these marks and where we go from here?
We saw Devontae hit the over on his yards and receptions and the touchdown. Same goes for Garrett Wilson over on yards, receptions, and TDs. And I didn't mention on the pregame show that both of these players were sitting in the high 50s when it comes to their yardage. If you wanted to alt them to 70, which I think is reasonable, especially like we're not taking a player who's at 40 and we're alting them to 70. We're taking a player who's in the high areas. So again, if he's in the high 40s and you want to alt him to 60, like we're still working with something reasonable. And that's something I always like to do. So those cashed in. Devontae, huge game. Garrett Wilson, huge game. Breece Hall, 15 for 74 on the ground. And this is kind of what I spoke about when it comes to the Jets offense overall. And, speaking, specifically about Tyler Conklin, and we had a little back and forth with Dave, and he said, just wasn't sure how much Conklin was going to be involved. 11 targets for Devontae Adams, 10 targets for Garrett Wilson. The next highest player was Breece Hall at 4. Breece Hall running 2 receptions. He had 15 carries. No other player had more than 2 targets. That was Mike Williams with 2. So, again, this is what we're going to be seeing from, I think, the Jets moving forward. We're going to see a really condensed offense where it's these 3 players and then everyone else. Braylon Allen had 4 carries for 9 yards, didn't do anything. We're going to, again, in the passing game, Braylon Allen, 1 target. Jeremy Rutger with 1 target. Like, these players aren't involved. And Conklin may be a red zone option. So, again, he may not be an option in terms of yards or receptions, but a TD prop may be the best way to go about it. And the same thing can be said about Houston, where we're seeing Joe Mixon fly over. We're seeing Tank Dell fly over. It's not going to be Dalton Schultz week, but we can maybe look to some of these players for a touchdown, like your Xavier Hutchinson, who may not have the yards, but he does have the red zone work.
Yeah, and when we saw those red zone attempts, so something they'll probably work on, taking it back to the book during practice this week. You touched on both offenses, you touched on the props and looking over, but let's see what the expectation might be for the quarterbacks now moving ahead. We saw on the graphic that Rodgers was sitting at 229, slightly fell short of that with 211, but considering where the start stood for the Jets, look, he still got in the mix there. Somebody mentioned on the pregame show, probably potentially looking at the passing TD prop, clearly being able to find the end zone 3 times between the targets of Adams and Wilson. He very much reached over that. I was on top of his attempts for the night, over 32.5. He came right at 32. So how do we kind of gauge Rodgers moving forward prop-wise?
I think they're still going to be slinging the ball, right? Breece Hall, I think, has explosive runs, which we saw him break off some solid runs, especially in the second half. They were moving the ball well, picking up first downs, both him and Garrett Wilson. Do I love going to his ground yardage every single game? No. I think, again, the best way to do it is probably going to be rushing plus receiving. I think they'll turn to passing the ball time and time again, especially, again, if they start off slow and they're playing from behind, their offense is inefficient in the first halves, they're going to have to pass the ball more in the second half. That's kind of what we saw. As for C.J. Stroud, I don't want to say like this is a bit of a sophomore slump for him, but, specifically the past 3 weeks have been like really, really mediocre. Or I'm going to say bad. One game last week was mediocre, 285 in the air to 1 touchdown. Granted, he has no interceptions over the past 3 weeks, but 10 of 21 against Green Bay with 86 passing yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. 11 of 30 tonight with 191, no touchdowns, no interceptions. 11 of 30 and 10 of 21 are just simply not good. This is a quarterback that we saw throw for over 4,000 yards. And granted, they're dealing with a lot of injuries on offense. Their offensive line isn't good right now, but the Texans got to figure things out because it is like, I don't want to say it's getting late quickly because I still think they'll win the division, but like it is a game of attrition for their offense right now, and getting Nico Collins back can't happen soon enough.
Yeah, and to be honest, part of the sophomore slump might be him making faster decision making that's going to work out for him, because some of the escapes that he tried to make when the line was crumbling in front of him or the pocket was crumbling, you're going too deep back, and that's kind of a big mistake when you're a bit younger. So a play that you could have kind of somewhat kept going, too many yards lost. So the decision-making process when the pocket goes crumbling, he's got to work on that. And yeah, it sucks to have a bad offensive line in front of you, but that just comes to with the practice with being at the NFL. If those are things he can get under his belt and get out of his comfort zone a little bit, then yeah, he could probably get back there. But I'd agree, it's a bit of a slump. Touching 200 passing yards has kind of been tight for him. And then outside of that, the decision-making process when he's running out of time is not all that well. So before we wrap up on final thoughts, again, Jets topping 21-13 over the Houston Texans. Any other final thoughts, angles, or things that you picked up from in this Thursday night matchup?
Ultimately, like I said, I think the Texans still win their division. I think they're going to be fine. They just have to get healthy, which is obviously a weird thing to say or a tough thing to say. Like there's no timetable and everything. I think they'll be fine. I think there is hope alive for the Jets to make the playoffs. It's not going to be easy, but I think there is hope, especially, they can finish second in their division. I don't think the Dolphins will eventually get there. I think it'll be the Bills, then the Jets, and they have to win the crucial games. They have to win these one-possession games. They have to stop fumbling the ball. They have to stop dropping the ball at the goal line. They have to make their field goals. Like, if they start doing everything at a much simpler and basic level, I think they will be okay.
All right. Well, that gives us something more to talk about because, of course, now the larger conversation is if you're not giving up on the Jets, where does this place them in the division? Where does this place them with their record at the end of this season? And how can they compete with a Dolphins team or with a Bills team that will be facing off with the Dolphins? The Bills' odds have been obviously stacking over the past couple of weeks. The success and the consistency has been there, but the Jets can probably present just enough of an issue. Just as Tom mentioned, all they have to do is clean up some of the things, simplify the game, and get back to the form that we were starting to see things come to week 1 and 2. So don't go anywhere. A little bit more here on Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV, catching you on the other side of this week.
Has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump. His release is really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from 3. Now, I'm not saying he's going to shoot at 49% from 3 for the season. But if he's at 42.3%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Back at it with Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV. And in case you missed it, Jets grab the W, 21-13, topping the Houston Texans. We've run through everything that you need to gauge moving forward, looking at these two teams. All hope is not lost for the Jets, and all hope is not lost for the Texans. We will see, though, as we approach that halfway point for the NFL season. Now, moving past that, looking ahead to Sunday, we kind of talked about where the Jets may lie when it comes to competing versus the Bills that are sitting atop of the division. Bills taking on a division rival in the Dolphins, who got Tua back. But regardless, spread sitting at 5.5 as they get ready for their matchup. Total sitting at 48.5 currently on FanDuel. What do we make of this matchup and what it means to the Bills as well as the Dolphins?
Yeah, I think this game is crucial for the Dolphins to come away with the win if they want to save their season. Obviously, was thrown into disarray when Tua Tagovailoa went out for multiple weeks. Just taking a look at some of the props now, I don't mind going to someone like Jalen Waddle at 51.5. We did see a few drops from him last week. I think that's going to happen, just getting back into the rhythm and the timing with Tua back under center. I think that's fine. I would have to double check the injury report, but Amari Cooper's not listed here, at least as of now, at least on FanDuel, also for receiving props for the Bills, and that's ultimately where I'll be looking. Neither is Keon Coleman, so depending on what we get from the Bills, those players are certainly ones I'll be looking at. I think that's where we should see a majority of the offense. If we're going to be seeing a big game out of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, we may not be seeing a big rushing game out of Devon Achane, but his receiving yards are sitting at 33.5, which may be my favorite bet so far, like at first glance of this. I think if we do see the Dolphins playing from behind, Achane's going to have to play a big role, and it may not be on the rushing game. And if the Bills' defense and secondary are devoting resources essentially to covering Tyreek Hill, I think Achane can have a big game underneath, picking up some easy passes and some easy yards after the catch.
Gotcha. And do you feel like the 79.5 for Tyreek Hill currently is a little too steep? Finally got a 70-plus performance the other week upon the return of Tua. You hope that chemistry is still there for them to pick up kind of where they left off before the beating by the Bills. But regardless, 79.5 coming into this one seems questionable.
Yeah, it's probably pretty spot on given what we've seen from Tyreek Hill. He's also struggled against the Bills at times throughout the course of his career. That's not a number I'm generally going to. Just again, I think it's going to be bet to the right spot. If it ends at 80 or 81, I wouldn't be surprised. If he falls under that, I'm not going to be surprised again because he's had his struggles. The Bills defense is good. They're going to be, I don't want to say keeping an eye on him, but that's the best way to put it. They're going to have an extra player covering him. So that's not a number I would go to. If he ends up with 120 yards, I'm also not going to be surprised. So it's just a number I generally stay away from. Again, looking at a secondary option like a Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, Devon Achane, those are the players I generally go to in these games where we have a clear number one. I think the drop off from 79 down to 33 when we're realistically talking about the third best receiving option, that's the line to attack.
Gotcha. I actually like that vantage point. Now, I do have to ask this, probably with the success going on currently, but anybody popping out at you already for potential touchdowns? I know you said don't touch the minuses. It's not worthwhile, but there might be a few odds here that could stand out, or is that where you were leaning towards when you mentioned let's figure out what's going on with Amari Cooper because he's sitting at plus value for TD?
Yeah, Cooper's at plus 150 and seeing Keon Coleman at plus 195. Again, I just have to double check the injury report because they're not listed on the receiving yards, but there's no reason that Cooper shouldn't be out there. And if him and Keon Coleman are going to be the number one and number two, we have seen a big drop off between where Khalil Shakir was early in the year and obviously with the addition of Amari Cooper, that's going to change things. But man, a game that's a 48.5 over under, we're getting the top two receiving options from a team at plus 150 or plus 195. Cooper and Coleman. Kind of like that combo, not to add some alliteration, but I think that's where I could be going.
You know I'm a fan of alliteration, so always add it in. Now we're almost done here on Pro Football Today, the post-game show. 1 minute. All right, Lions, Packers. You've got like the power play run of what you think this game is going to be. 2.5 on the spread, 48.5.
We got to see if Jordan Love's going to be playing. I will say when Malik Willis was starting for the Packers earlier in the year, they had like a perfect game script that Matt LaFleur had, calling things essentially exactly what they wanted. If we do see Jordan Love, I would not be hesitant to take unders on him if he's not going to be at full health. And that means we're going to have to see a lot out of Josh Jacobs on the ground. For the Lions, I think they're going to continue to cruise. I think they'll continue to roll the yards and the offense will be there. Go to a combo of Sonic and Knuckles out of the backfield, as they like to be called, for Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Probably overs on both of them.
You nailed it. Way to crush the power play. Well, that is the Pro Football Today post-game show here on SportsGrid TV with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. And you know where to find us, usually on the pregame party. Other than that, we'll catch you guys next time. I hope everybody has a safe and wonderful Halloween evening.